Shakespeare was such an amazing sonnetier that there is actually a type of sonnet today that we refer to that we refer to Shakespeare was such an amazing sonnetier that there is actually a type of sonnet today that we refer to as a Shakespearean sonnet. Even though Shakespeare isn't the inventor of the Shakespearean sonnet, he was certainly the master of this kind of poem. Quite simply, a Shakespearean sonnet contains 14 lines of iambic pentameter. It has three quatrains. It has three quatrains, four lines each, and a final rhyming couplet of two lines. Therefore, the rhyme scheme is always A B A B, up up, C D C D, set set, E F E F, and finally G G. Most often, a problem is presented in the first 12 lines or so, with a solution following by the end of the poem. During the Elizabethan period, writing groups of sonnets with similar themes called a sonnet sequence became very popular. Shakespeare wrote the best of these sonnet sequences. In my opinion, he, his contained a full 154 sonnets. They focus on a handsome young man, a revival poet, and sometimes even a dark lady. These subjects often cause scholars to disagree upon the truth behind Shakespeare's life and sexuality. So, today I am going to discuss in detail Shakespeare's sonnet number 19, entitled the first line as it is Devouring Time, blunt thou the lion's paws. So I will give you the summary first. All consuming time, dull the lion's claws and force the earth to ravenously eat up her own sweet children. Remove the sharp teeth from the powerless tiger's mouth and burn the immortal phoenix in her own blood. Turn happiness into sadness as you quickly slip away, and do whatever you will, quick moving time, to the whole world and all its fleeting pleasures. But I refuse to let you commit one truly unspeakable crime. Don't etch wrinkles into my love's young and beautiful forehead. Don't use your old pen to draw any lines on his face. Leave him alone so that his beauty can serve as a model for future generations of men. That said, you might as well do your worst old time, because even if you wrong my love, even if you wrong my love, he will remain forever young in my poetry. So, sonnet number 19 focuses on the idea that everyone and everything is at the mercy of time, a force that the poem argues leads to inevitable deterioration and decline. Even the fiercest lions and tigers aren't exempt from the personified time's mighty power, the speaker says, which eventually makes all things fade. Nothing lasts forever, the poem implies, and the speaker is particularly troubled by the fact that devouring time, will lay waste to the youth and beauty of the speaker's love. The speaker notes that even the strongest, most respected creatures on earth are vulnerable to the passage of time, which can blunt a lion's claws or pluck the sharp teeth from a tiger's mouth. Given that these animals are so strong and powerful, their physical deterioration highlights that the cruelty of time makes no exceptions, no matter what, all living things are fated to decline. Time, in other words, has its way with everything in the end, an idea that the speaker further accentuates by mentioning the long lived phoenix. The phoenix is a mythical creature. Mythical creature that, upon bringing to death, rises from its own ashes and begins life anew. Although this birth usually represents the idea of immortality, this poem highlights something else about the phoenix, namely that this mythical creature is susceptible to the passage of time, just like everything else. After all, its many life cycles demonstrate that even things that live forever are still subject to destruction. If even if even the immortal phoenix is influenced by time's unrelenting march, it's clear that humans are even more vulnerable to decay and change. This is why the speaker implores time to spare the lover, asking it to not itch wrinkles into his face. This, however, is not a reasonable request, since it's obviously impossible to protect somebody from the effects of age and time. In the end, the speaker knows time will do its worst to the lover, and this spotlights the inarguable fact that nothing can withstand the pull of time. Simply put, everything in life, including youth and beauty, is fleeting. Art and immortality. Despite arguing that time is an all consuming destructive force, the speaker spends much of the poem trying to fight back, imploring the personified time to spare the youth and beauty of the speaker's beloved. In the end, however, the speaker seemingly rejects the rules the poem has established altogether, declaring that if time won't spare the lover, then the speaker will simply preserve this person through verse. Although it's impossible for people to avoid the ravages of time, then the speaker argues that it is possible to use art and, more specifically, poetry to immortalize certain aspects of human life. The speaker aspects that there is no avoiding the passage of time and the destruction it brings. To make this easier to bear, the speaker takes comfort in the idea that the poem itself will preserve the lover. Time may carve wrinkles and draw lines onto his face, but the speaker is confident that the lover will remain youthful and attractive in poetry, saying, "My love shall in my verse ever living young." The word live in this phrase is especially important since it suggests that poetry isn't just a record of the past, but rather something capable of housing an ongoing spirit of the lover's youth, something the poem implies will continue to live long after time and had and had its way with the lover. In this sense, part of the lover's youth will survive old age and even death. Poetry then is more than a simple historical document. It's something that gives lasting life to otherwise short-lived ephemeral things like youth and beauty in the face of such impermanence. The speaker suggests creating art is a meaningful way to immortalize a person's most fleeting qualities. The sonnet begins with both apostrophe and personification as the speaker directly addresses time itself. By using the word devouring, the speaker invites readers to see time as an all consuming, destructive force that ravages everything in its path. To further demonstrate time's might, the speaker goes on to say, "Blunt thou the lion's paws." Lions are very powerful and strong animals, and the fact that time is capable of dulling their sharp claws implies that even the fiercest, most fearsome creatures on earth are no match for time, which gradually weakens everything in its path. In other words, age inevitably brings on decay, as everything that was once glorious and strong eventually loses its age. Thus, this, it seems, is simply the way the world works, an idea the speaker highlights by personifying the earth, saying, "And make the earth devour her own sweet brood." This phrase repeats the word devour, emphasizing the idea that time lays waste to everything and that experiencing this kind of ruin is simply part of being alive. The metaphorical idea of time forcing the earth to eat her own sweet brood also implies that the earth itself is bound to time in unavoidable ways, that life on earth is defined by the passage of time. These opening lines also establish the poem's use of iambic pentameter, a meter in which lines contain five iambs, metrical feet consisting of an unstressed syllabic followed by a stressed syllabic ardum, ardum, ardum. However, the first two lines contain two metrical substitutions: devour, devouring time, devouring, devouring time, blunt thou the lion's paws, and make the earth devour her own sweet brood. For the most part, there is a strong iambic rhythm in these lines as phrases like and make the earth devour feature the da dum la da dum thump created by a string of iambs. And yet these lines also include two spondees, which are metrical feet consisting of two stressed syllables. For instance, the words blunt thou in the first line create a spondee, as do the words sweet brood in the second line. This subtly disrupts the iambic rhythm, but it doesn't totally open the overall feel of the poem. Instead, these spondees indicate that the poem won't perfectly follow its own meter, effectively leading to a slightly off-kilter feel that perhaps reflects the speaker's discomfort with the fact that time lays waste to all. The lion, tiger, and phoenix. The speaker mentions a lion, a tiger, and a phoenix in Sonnet 19, all of which normally represent strength and vitality in literature. However, the speaker doesn't use these animals just to symbolize power, but also to demonstrate that not even the fiercest, most resilient creatures are capable of withstanding the cruel passage of time. According to the speaker, time will blunt the lion's claws and pluck the sharp teeth from a tiger's mouth. What's more, time burns the phoenix, a mythological bird that usually represents immortality in its own blood, or perhaps in the tiger's blood, depending on how readers interpret the speaker's words. Of course, one might think that the phoenix has found a way to triumph over time, since it rises from its own ashes to begin a new life each time burns to death. However, this cynical process actually highlights time's inevitable influence, since the phoenix is just as bound to the revolutions of time as anything else. In turn, all the animals in Sonnet 19 are symbols of time's mercilessness, illustrating that even the most powerful creatures can't escape time related decay. Sonnet 19. Devouring time, blunt thou the lion's paws, have some poetic devices and figurative languages. First, we get parallelism. The first half of the poem is defined by the speaker's use of parallelism with lines 2, 4, and 6, all beginning the same way and make the earth devour her own sweet brood, and burn the long-lived phoenix in her blood, and do whatever thou wilt, swift-footed time. In each of these lines, the speaker addresses time and tells it to do something specific, urging it to force the earth devour her own sweet brood, them telling it to burn the long-lived phoenix, and finally telling it to generally do whatever it wants. This firmly establishes the poem's overall structure, which is based upon the speaker's attempt to talk directly to time. This parallelism also adds a certain rhythm to the poem, making it feel repetitive and predictable. Thus, in turn, makes it all the more noticeable when the speaker breaks from this pattern in line 8 by saying, "But I forbid thee one more heinous crime." Until this point, all of the even numbers. Until this point, all of the even numbered lines begin with the word "and." This one, however, begins with the word "but," signaling a change in the speaker's attitude. Indeed, the speaker suddenly rises to forbid time from doing whatever it wants, and this shift is accentuated by the fact that the poem transitions away from the parallelism that defines the feeling, rhythm, and structure of the first six lines. The first two quatrains establish the idea that time lays waste to everything in the world, even the most powerful and seemingly untouchable creatures. Then, in the third quatrain, the speaker tries to convince time itself to leave the lover alone, a plea that the speaker eventually abandons in the poem's turn, which appears in the first line of the couplet. In this moment, the speaker gives up trying to protect the lover from time's influence and instead tells him to do its worst. This shift then allows the speaker to see set forth a new idea, which is that the poem itself will preserve the lover's youthful beauty even after time takes its toll. In this way, the structure of the sonnet clearly outlines the speaker's developing thought process. Now, meter. Sonnet 19 is written in iambic pentameter, meaning that the majority of its lines contain five iambs, metrical feet consisting of an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable, a dum. Consider, for example, the first two lines: devour, devouring time, devouring time. Blunt out the lines pause. These lines have a definite iambic uh, feel. But it's worth noting that not all the metrical feet create an iambic bounce. For instance, the first line's third foot isn't an iamb but a spondy, a metrical foot made up of two consecutive stressed syllables, blunt thou. Similarly, the last foot of line 2 as a spondy, sweet brood. These opening lines still maintain the general da dum rhythm of iambic pentameter, but the spondies make them sound a little less predictable, keeping the poem interesting and fresh. Similar variations appear in elsewhere in the poem, such as when the speaker tells time in line 9 to leave the lover alone. Oh, carp not with the hours, my love's fair bro. The Caesara after O in the first foot sets the word apart and makes it sound stressed as a result. Oh, God is yet another spondy. The lion's second foot is then a touchy, trushy, is a trushy, stressed, unstressed, not with, as such, with the first three syllables of the line are all stressed, giving this movement a particularly forceful, assertive sound that reflects the speaker's determination to sternly forbid time from running the lover's beauty. It's also worth pointing out that the final food could be read as a spondy, too, placing emphasis on the word fair and thus accentuating the idea that it would be a heinous crime for time to deface the lover's good looks. On the whole, then, the speaker's use of meter not only makes sure the poem's rhythm avoids monotony, but also spotlights certain important words or phrases that align with the theme at hand. Rhyme scheme. The poem follows the standard rhyme scheme of Shakespearean sonnet, which looks like this: A B A B, C D C D, E F E F, G G. Each quatrain features alternating end rhymes, giving the lines a feeling of musicality and cohesion. The dependability of this rhyme scheme also creates a sense of predictability that aligns with the poems. With the poems. Hello, hello. Yes, aligns with the poem's overall message, namely that time marches on no matter what, and that there's no stopping the effect this has on people. Although it might seem to contemporary readers that lines 2 and 4 don't actually rhyme. The words brood and blood most likely did rhyme in Shakespeare's pronunciation. The same may be true for lines 13 and 14. Overall, the rhyme scheme holds it together quite well throughout the poem, creating a sense of regularity and consistency that reflects the steady forward march of time. There isn't much identifying information about the poem's speaker. However, readers can conclude that the speaker is in love with a young, attractive man, as evidenced by the personal pronoun him, and that the speaker finds the thought of time destroying this man's beauty unbearable. In some ways, his thought process implies that the speaker is older than the lover and knows all too well that time inevitably destroys all the positive things associated with youth. This reading aligns with the widely held belief that the speaker in all 126 of Shakespeare's fair youth sonnets is the same person, an older male poet involved in a romantic affair with a beautiful younger man, even on its own. And though Sonnet 19 presents the speaker as someone determined to cherish the lover's youthful qualities in any way possible, even if this is only achievable through poetry. The setting of the poem is ambiguous because neither the physical surroundings nor the time period factor very heavily into the sonnet's of, subject. After all, the poem meditates on love, the passage of time, and art's ability to immortalize otherwise fleeting aspects of human existence. These ideas are relatively universal, and by not placing the poem in a specific place or time, the speaker in a way plucks the beloved himself out of time's gap. Literary context of this sonnet. This sonnet belongs to Shakespeare's fair youth sequence, which consists of 126 sonnets that typically revolve around themes of love, art, and the passage of time. Most readers believe that the speaker believed that the speaker of the sonnets is an aging male poet who is in a romantic relationship with a younger man. Throughout this sequence, the speaker laments the swift nature of time and worries about how it will ruin the lover and in turn their romantic bond. The fair youth sequence often turns to art as a way to preserve and immortalize the love between the speaker and the young man, something Sonnet 19 does very clearly when the speaker suggests that despite the ravages of time, the lover will ever live long in the speaker's own poetry. In general, these ideas draw upon concerns that are common in Renaissance poetry. Indeed, most sonnets during this period dealt with the various sorrows and joys associated with romantic affection, a tradition that began in the 1300s when the Italian poet Francesco Petrarch seized upon such themes in his sonnets, the majority of which centered around love and desire. These sonnets were so popular that the form Petrarch used, though did not invent, became a template that many poets copied, a template now known as the Petrarchan sonnet. Sonnet 19, of course, isn't a Petrarchan sonnet, but rather a Shakespearean sonnet. This means that it features a different rhyme scheme and a slightly different structure, whereas Petrarchan sonnets consist of an octave followed by a sestet. Shakespearean sonnets consist of three quatrains followed by a final couplet. Nonetheless, there is no denying that Shakespeare's thematic interest in sonnet takes cues from Petrarch's work. The difference in the structure and presentation then simply highlights the ways in which the sonnet evolved as a form between the 1300s and the late 1500s, taking on new iterations as it spread through medieval Europe. Now, in historical context, most scholars believe that Sonnet 19 was written in 1590s, which was a remarkably peaceful and prosperous time in England. In 1588, Spain sent a fleet of 130 ships to invade England with the purpose of overthrowing Queen Elizabeth and destroying one of the prominent footholds of Protestantism in Europe. However, the fleet, known as the Spanish Armada, lost miserably to England, and the ensuing years were relatively calm in Britain as a result. This therefore meant that Englanders had time to focus on and patronize the arts, which is possibly why the 1590s were among the most prolific years of Shakespeare's writing career, at least in terms of creative output. During this time, he not only composed plays like Henry IV Parts 1 and through 3, A Midsummer Night's Dream, and The Merchant of Venice, but also penned his sonnets. And although there are certainly some very dark moments, including the outbreak of bubonic plague in 1592 that shut down London's theatres and killed 15,000 people, this time period is generally seen as a fruitful, productive era in England, especially for writers like Shakespeare. Modern readers associate the sonnet from with romantic love, and with good reason. The first sonnets written in 13th and 14th century Italy celebrated the poets' feelings for their beloveds and their patrons. These sonnets were addressed to stylized, lionized women and dedicated to wealthy noblemen who supported poets with their money and their gifts, usually in return for lofty praise in print. Shakespeare dedicated his sonnets to Mr. W. H., and the identity of this man remains unknown. He dedicated an earlier set of poems, Venus and Adonis and Rape of Lucre, to Henry Wriothesley, Earl of Southampton, but it's not known what Wriothesley gave him for this honor. Tradition, in contrast to tradition, Shakespeare addressed most of his sonnets to an unnamed young man, possibly Wriothesley. Addressing sonnets to a young man was unique in Elizabethan England. Furthermore, Shakespeare used his sonnets to explore different types of love between the young man and the speaker, the young man and the dark lady, and the dark lady and the speaker. In his sequence, the speaker expresses passionate concern for the young man, praises his beauty, and articulates what we would now call a homosexual desire. The woman of Shakespeare's sonnets, the so-called dark lady, is earthy, sexual, and faithless, characteristics in direct opposition to lovers described in other sequences, including Astrophil and Stella by Sir Philip Sidney, a contemporary of Shakespeare who was praised for their angelic demeanor, virginity, and steadfastness. Several sonnets also probe the nature of love, comparing the idealized love found in poems with the messy, complicated love found in real life. The dangers of lust and love. In Shakespeare's sonnets, falling in love can have painful emotional and physical consequences. Sonnets 127 to 152, addressed to the so called dark lady, express a more overtly erotic and physical love than the sonnets addressed to the young man. But many sonnets warn readers about the dangers of lust and love. According to some poems, lust causes us to mistake sexual desire for true love, and love itself causes us to lose our powers of perception. Several sonnets warn about the dangers of lust, claiming that it turns the humans savage, extreme, rude, cruel, as in Sonnet 129. The final two sonnets of Shakespeare's sequence obliquely imply that lust leads to venereal disease. According to the conventions of romance, the sexual act or making love expresses the deep feeling between two people. In his sonnets, However, Shakespeare portrays making love not as a romantic expression of sentiment but as a base physical need with the potential for horrible consequences. Shakespeare portrays beauty as conveying a great responsibility in the sonnets addressed to the young man. Sonnets from sonnets 1 to 126. Here, the speaker urges the young man to make his beauty immortal by having children, a theme that appears repeatedly throughout the poems. As an attractive person, the young man has a responsibility to procreate. Later sonnets demonstrate the speaker angry at being cuckolded, lashing out at the young man and accusing him of using his beauty to hide immoral acts. Sonnet 95 compares the young man's behavior to a canker in the fragrant rose or a rotten spot on a otherwise beautiful flower. In other words, the young man's beauty allows him to get away with bad behavior, but this bad behavior will eventually distort his beauty, much like a rotten spot eventually spreads. Nature gave the young man a beautiful face, but it is the young man's responsibility to make sure that his soul is worthy of such a visit. So, this was a lecture from Professor S.K. University professor, Department of English, BRA, Bihar University, Muzaffarpur. So, dear students of PG Same 1, I have completed my 2 days lecture, and thank you for your precious